Welcome to Whiskey Wednesday and our weekly webcast from the WhiskyCast.com studios. As you can see, I'm joined by two of the legends in the Scotch whiskey industry, the one and only Bill Lumsden and equally one and only, uniquely their own, Richard Paterson. They'll be joining me in just a few seconds here, and we'll be glad to take your whiskey questions and comments in the chat window here on the website. If you're watching us on Twitter, you can't send us feedback or post comments because we will not see those until after the show ends. So go to Periscope and post your comments there, or you can post them on the YouTube page at WhiskyCast on the Webcast, our WhiskyCast YouTube channel, rather, and of course at our Facebook page. And the guys are already starting to get out of hand here, so let's just go ahead and bring the guys in. How are you both doing today?
Fantastic.
Yes, pretty good, Mark, considering the circumstances we're all in just now. So it's great to be able to speak with friends this evening and enjoy a little drink of something interesting.
What do you got?
I chose this deliberately because I thought it might horrify Richard here. You know what a Puritan he is, what a purist. So this is a little whiskey cooler, Glenmorangie original, with some freshly squeezed lime juice, a big rock of ice, Richard, and some ginger beer, actually.
Big rock of ice. You know what you can do with that one.
I would try and throw it to you, but I think I would break the screen.
Yeah, please. Richard's the only one that gets to toss whiskey around here.
As long as it's just his own.
Great.
Richard, what have you got, Richard?
What have I got? I've got a bottle of the Dalmore King Alexander.
Oh, yeah.
Only whiskey in the world with 6 different finishes. But before I say anything else, this is a big slangy vow to all these wonderful guys over in America. Guys, we're all in the same boat here. But stay safe, stay well, whatever you do. And drink in moderation, of course. But drink, and you know what? As Bill and I, Mark, what does whiskey do? It brings us all together. That's
absolutely does.
Absolutely does.
Slangiva.
For the record, since I make it a point to stay neutral and not play any favorites on these shows because we've got multiple brands represented, I have a single malt in my glass, but it is a Czech single malt.
Aha.
And let me just take the screen here so I can show it to you fully. It is the Hammerhead 30-year-old from the Czech Republic. It was distilled in the Prodlo distillery back in '89. We've told the story of this a few times where somebody in the old Czechoslovakia got the great idea that Prodlo should be making whiskey at one of the great breweries in what was then Czechoslovakia. And those barrels got put away. The Iron Curtain came down and they sort of got forgotten about for 20, 25 years or so until the stock spirits guys bought the brewery, found out about the whiskey that was in those warehouses and started bottling it. Our pal Raj Sabharwal at Glass Revolution Imports arranged for a 30-year-old single cask bottling to be brought to the U.S. and kindly sent me a bottle of it, and I'll have my tasting notes for it this weekend on WhiskyCast and up at the website soon. But I wanted to drink a single malt, but I can't play favorites between you guys because I've tasted so many great whiskeys from both of you that I didn't want to try to play favorites. So I'm staying away from single malt scotches completely.
I can see you seem to be enjoying it anyway, Mark, I must say. Although I would dare to suggest that the smile on my face from drinking Glenmorangie and the smile on Richard's face from drinking Dalmore is bigger than yours.
Well, that's because you guys made it. You guys have your own passion and joy that went into those bottles. So it's only natural that you have a big old grin on your face when you're drinking them.
But you got to remember one thing, Mark. A lot of people maybe don't realize this in America. You know, both Bill and I are true Highland whiskies. You know, forget about your Speyside guys. We are actually 23 miles from Inverness, and that's where the distillery is. But we only go 14 miles up the road where we see the lovely Glenmorangie distillery. So we're neighbors, and we've actually been neighbors for so many years now, because even during the bad times, good times, when you guys were the U.S. Navy in 1918, came over from America, and we did all the landmines at Dalmore. We sent our whiskey where? We sent it over to Glenmorangie, places like that. So we worked together, even as close as that, all those years ago. So that's why, Bill, I love you.
Yeah. Me
and
too,
you're all
Richard.
neighbors too down on the southwest coast between Jura and Ardbeg too. So
Yeah.
we could
That's right.
can't really count that out either.
Yeah, and actually, just when we're on that subject, because Bill, maybe you could correct me. Was it not something in? Let me just see. Was it not the 19th of March, 2008? You took a name called Corey Vrecken.
It was on that date that we quite correctly got in there before you guys did and chose that wonderful name for one of our Ardbeg whiskies.
Wait, just to remind people so there's no confusion, Ardbeg is on a place called Isla, is that right?
That's correct, Richard.
Jura is on a place called Jura.
That's correct also.
North of Jura, what do you find? Corey.
I think if you
find Glen Ardbeg or anything like that.
I think if you go into the sea off the islands of both Isla and Jura, you'll come across the Corey Vrecken whirlpool. You know, first mover advantage and all that good stuff, Richard.
We're going to put some of your comments here, and I'm going to try to see if I can get a word in edgewise between these two tonight. I may not have to say a word for most of this, but tell me what you guys are doing to get by during this, because we're all working from home now, and I know that you guys still have whiskeys that have to be blended and still have to be produced. So how are you getting by?
It's interesting, Mark, because Richard and I did have a little chat about this on the telephone earlier on this evening. And, you know, of course, we're in very strange times, and everyone's top priority is keeping safe and keeping everyone else safe. So the offices of both our companies have been closed down for quite some time. Before this all happened, we had quite a stock of samples in our various tasting laboratories. So I made several trips in there before the close down and took boxes and boxes of samples home with me. So my little mini tasting laboratory in the kitchen of my home, which is where I'm actually sitting this evening, has been going on very, very strongly. And, you know, so some more up-to-date news is that the Glenmorangie distillery actually started distilling again just within the last 2 weeks, obviously working to very strictly imposed social distancing practices. But we have had a skeleton staff at the distillery who, working alone, have been able to get samples. So I'm sure, I mean, I'll pass over to Richard now, but I'm sure he's in the same position as me, that I seem to have been busier than I've ever been over the last 7 weeks. So the good news for people is that delicious whiskey is still being blended and created.
Before you start, what about Ardbeg? Is it still shut down, Bill?
Yes, Ardbeg was in the middle of our expansion program. So we were going from 2 to 4 stills. So there was a major project going on of building the new still house there. So unfortunately, that has come to a halt because of the current situation. But, you know, we look forward in the near future to restarting that program. See, the distillery was closed down anyway.
Okay, Richard, what's going on with your places, with Whyte Mackay?
Well, just as Bill has said, the safeguard of our staff is of paramount importance to us, and we must make sure that they are completely safe and we're conforming to everything that's going to be a workable relationship. What is so great about working with our distilleries, particularly Invergordon, we hope by the end of the year to have created somewhere in the region of 7 million litres of alcohol of Invergordon, which has gone to produce sanitizers. And that is really helping not just the communities around, obviously up in that area in the Highlands, but the rest of Scotland and many other parts of the world. So we're making some small contribution. It's only a small part, but it's helping to make sure the men that have gone in to produce this noble spirit have really helped everybody else as well. So Invergordon has been maintained during that period for that. And also Dalmore, it has just to get back this week, a skeleton staff, but we hope to ramp up as well. Both the Jura, Ferricare and Tamnavulin will also follow on as well. Our bottling halls at Grangemouth, once again, were very difficult to get all the lines up and running and keep the separation, which is of paramount importance. But that has begun to start. We've got a lot of back orders that we need to get into the system and hopefully get the cogwheels moving once again. But it's going to be a slow process. Make no mistake, we're doing it cautiously. We must keep these controls in place. We must keep our staff safe and well. As I always say, just like Bill has said, that is of paramount importance. But, you know, like everything else, we will get through it, but it will take time. Remember, maturing whiskey takes a long time. So, you know, this is something that we have to do in exactly the same manner.
You're both celebrating milestones this year. Bill, you 25 years at Glenmorangie. Richard, September, 50 years at Whyte and Mackay, and I think, what, 55, 56 overall in the industry?
55 coming up, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to get my Zimmer out, you know, but listen, it doesn't matter what age you are or how long you've been with the company. All I will say to you, and especially to you, Mark, because I've known you for many years, and especially with all your followers, you've got to have that passion. And, you know, even though that Bill works for a different company, it doesn't matter. We are working for one aim, and that's to promote Scotch whisky around the world. And look at all the viewers that are hopefully looking in. They've got their whiskey. It just is so wonderful that we can have such a great spirit like this and bring everybody together in the good times, the bad times, but it's something we can share. So, you know, we're carrying on, but hopefully we'll get through very soon.
And I'm smiling here, Mark, and you know, it's quite poignant for me that, as you know, I was with Diageo, the distillers company, for 10 years, and you're right, this is my 25th year with the Glenmorangie company, and Richard here is celebrating his 50th year with Whyte and Mackay. And when I say it's poignant, that when I started off in the industry and was at university, Richard genuinely was one of my whiskey heroes. So it's quite astonishing that I'm now sharing the stage with him. And, you know, we work together on many things. So that's one of the beautiful things about the industry. And Richard's already touched on this, that I can't think of any other industry in the world where, even although you're working for so-called rival companies, you do whatever you can to help each other out, and that's what I love about this industry.
And you know, just when you're saying that, Bill, it's the same with Ardbeg and Jura. You know, when you work with Jura and Ardbeg on these two islands, you have got to be the best of neighbours, because quite often we've run out of barley maybe at Jura, we phone up Ardbeg, we phone up Lagavulin, Lafroy, we need your help. You cannot, you've got to work together. And that's what we always do.
Yeah, and it's, you know, if we have a breakdown at the Glenmorangie distillery and need to borrow a pump from Dalmore, which, you know, our friends at Dalmore will happily loan us, you can just hop in the car and drive down the road. It's a bit trickier swimming across the Sound of Jura with a pump over your back, I have to say.
Yeah, you can end up in the Atlantic, Bill, as you know. Don't try swimming it, I tell you that.
You could even end up in the Corrie Vrecken, that famous Ardbeg associated whirlpool. Yeah.
You know, quite often, Mark, quite often when we do these presentations, I say, when I come to America, hands up who've been to Isla, Ardbeg, and they put their hands up. I said, look, just keep your hands up. How many of you then went on over to Jura? And their hands go down. I said to them, you know, why did you not get over to Jura? Gee, Richard, there wasn't time. What do you mean there wasn't time? It only takes 4.5 minutes to cross over by ferry from Isle over to Jura, you lazy American bums.
You got to wait for the ferry, and they don't run every 5 minutes.
No, I'll tell you, you know, Mark, just now, these ferries, got to take my hand off it. It's a bit like all these wonderful people working in the supermarkets. If that ferry is needed, they will put it for you. That's what's so great about that community spirit, working together. They have to do it. It's a lifeline.
And you know, that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about the operation of our Ardbeg distillery, that there's an extra dimension of challenge in there, because a lot of the things you need, you can't just hop down the road and get them. You have to have careful planning, you know, to bring the malted barley onto the islands and so on and so forth. So again, that makes it even more important that we have such camaraderie in our industry.
When Eds, who of course has been with you for many years now, when he was our distillery manager, he arrived and it was a Sunday, and he went down to the only shop in Jura, and the guys in the street said, you know, just hadn't met him before, said, "Hello, I'm Jim." I said, "What's your name?" "Oh, I'm the new manager at Jura Distillery." "Oh, where are you going?" "I'm going to the shop to get my Sunday papers." He said, "Sunday papers?" "No, the Sunday papers don't arrive until Monday."
Monday, yeah.
You know, get a life here.
Hey, we got a question. Let me get a word in edgewise here. Crump Crumpler. Curious if these two lords of Scotch enjoy other whiskeys like rye, bourbon, or Irish whiskeys. What do you guys drink when you're not drinking your own stuff?
Yeah.
Bill,
It's an excellent question. And again, the little story I was telling you off camera earlier, gents, when I was trawling through the depths of one of my many drinks cupboards in the house, I discovered all sorts of things that I had forgotten I had in there, including some High West rye whiskey, a nice bottle of Four Roses single barrel select bourbon, and a nice little Woodford Reserve. So to answer the question, there's no question that I do enjoy drinking our whiskies, particularly the whiskies from the United States and Japan, I have to say, are probably my most favorite other whiskey drinks.
Richard?
Well, I tell you, every time I come to America, you know, because we were very highly involved with Jim Beam all those years, you know, bourbon was every time I came to America. So I tried a lot of bourbons, but I always make a point when I'm in that country, whether it be Japan or, you know, South America or South Africa, I usually try and drink as many of these spirits as possible, because there's no point in concentrating on just your own whiskeys. You must find out what is actually going on in that respective country that you're visiting. So I'm constantly drinking all the time. But, you know, I have to say, obviously, I drink during my products. And then when I'm on the plane, I'm, you know, sampling there as well. Because building up your knowledge, and Bill and I share the same International Wine Spirit Competition, International Spirits Challenge, where we're judging all these whiskies. But it's best to do it in a relaxed manner and find out really what's going on. So I drink a lot of bourbon, a lot of whiskey, a lot of everything when I'm on the road.
Got a question for you now. First of all, Sailor Guevara, our pal from the Pacific Northwest and Uncle Nearest Whiskey. I can't wait till I'm at a point in my career when I can throw whiskey from my glass all over the place. Hashtag Richard Paterson rules. Now,
well, let me just say,
I get asked all the time, what's my favorite whiskey? And I can't answer that question. But I can tell you one of my favorite photographs of all time that I've ever shot. And it's this one that Richard and I did in Victoria about 5 years ago at the Victoria Whiskey Festival, where right after you finished up one of your master classes, I pulled you aside for a second and said, I want to get you doing the whiskey toss. Now, for the photographers in the room, this was shot at 1/6400th of a second. And that's a really short shutter speed with a high-speed sync flash to be able to catch that. There's no photoshopping in this other than the background, because the walls at the Hotel Grand Pacific at that time had a really textured wallpaper on there that kind of distracted from the background a little bit. But I have to admit that that's one of my favorite photos that I have ever made, Richard. And how did you start doing the whiskey toss to begin with? Let's start.
Right. Well, let me, and in fact, what I am proud to say is it actually emanated originally from one of the great master blenders who's still alive, is a great man. His name is Donald McKinley. Now, Donald is he's up north, but I managed to speak to him just actually last week to find out he was. And what he used to do in the film produced by the Scotch Whisky Association, which I started showing way back in the 70s, was a film called Time Was the Beginning. And what he did, and what I still do to this day, is what I started is he used to take the nosing glass like this and shake it around and then nose it. But invariably, quite a lot went on the floor, but not as much as what I throw, because what I tend to do, and this is, a lot of people say you just do this for show. I don't. When I'm in the sample room in Glasgow and I want to make sure that the glass is clean, I will actually swirl it around and then throw it on the floor. And that eliminates any possible odors. What it doesn't do, it doesn't stain the carpet. But what it does do is that it makes sure that that nosing glass, especially around the rim, is completely clean and it's ready for looking at the whiskey seriously. So it may look like show, but it's there for a reason. It's a habit I picked up, and I like it.
And did you know, Mark, that
doing it? I remember at least once in New York at a tasting with some media where you did that and didn't look ahead of you and nailed some reporter's laptop.
Yeah, I've had that. I've unfortunately got people in the way, and they got it. I've had it through a guitar. I've had it through an electric organ. You name it. And in Taiwan, I was charged something like £300 for $300 or $600 for a replacement of the carpet. You know, all these guys that panic. You know?
Yeah. It also, Mark,
an embassy with some silk drapes that you nailed once that with the whiskey, and the drapes had to be replaced.
Yeah, that's. I have to say that's another one. Yeah.
And Derek Cuthbert asks how often you need to clean the carpets in your office when you do that.
No, it's actually all right. It won't stain it. It won't stain it. But, you know, you get the occasional smell coming from it. But no, it's a good smell.
I was just going to say, Mark.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, thinking of Richard and his famous whiskey toss, as you know, Richard has lots of nicknames in the Scotch whiskey industry. You know, the Nose, Tricky Dicky, but my favourite is the Whiskey Tosser.
Yeah, say no more, Bill.
Let's get one with it out for you now, Bill. From Tracer Bullet, I was disappointed to find out that there would not be a Glenmorangie private edition release this year. Does this mean that Dr. Lumsden has something special plans to release next year? I hope. Are the private editions gone for good now with the release of Alta?
Okay, so the actual moniker, the name, the private edition is no more. But of course, the series of experimentation that led to all of these whiskies, starting with Sonalta and finishing up last year with Alta, the experimentation continues at a great pace. So there will be new experimental limited whiskey releases. They just won't be called the private edition range. And in fact, we were drawing up plans to release one of these new whiskies later on this year in New York City, but we've had to put that all on ice just now during the current crisis. So slightly sad news that the private edition per se is no more, but the very good news is that this range of experimental whiskies will continue.
And you replaced it with the Cadball for this year, the Cadball Estate, right?
No, that was something slightly different, and that was a limited release we did exclusively for the United States. And, you know, I felt that the taste profile of that particular whiskey would go down very well in a country which already had a love for Scotch whiskey and also for American bourbon whiskey. So that is something slightly different from the private edition range. But basically what I would say is for people who love the private edition, watch this space. There are new things coming along.
And the Alta that you did last year, the last private edition release that had the wild yeast from the Cadball barley fields. Are you going to use that wild yeast again for other projects? Or
I already have done, Mark. That's now, we own the rights to that yeast. That is our yeast. So I've used it for a number of other experiments. It's obviously going to be many years now before they will see the light of day. But the main thing about that is that it's spawned a lot of experimentation in different types of yeast and microorganisms. So there's a lot more to come from that one experiment.
Richard, do you have a preference when you're working with the various single malts that you work with between obviously the Dalmore, Jura, Fettercairn, Tam Navulin? Do you have a different style that you use, or do you have a preference when you're blending those together and blending the casks for those single malts?
No, whether it be Jura, Tam Navulin, Fettercairn, or Dalmore itself, I actually approach them in exactly the same way. To my mind, these are very special people that I must look after. I must make sure that they are accommodated in the finest casks. And that's why over the years, my journey to Oporto, my journey to Jerez de la Frontera and various parts of France, looking and searching for the most compatible whiskies that will go, the compatible spirits and wines that will go with my cask. But it's a lot of experimentation, just like Bill. Bill will go through many different styles of casks and ease out the ones that will be the ones that will really highlight the nuances, the character of our single malts. And that's why experimentation, innovation is going on all the time. And although that we might be in a lockdown here, the whiskies, I can assure you, in the warehouse are still maturing and still trying to get to their peak of perfection. It's an ongoing business. And, this whiskey business is a lockdown, but it's not a lockdown for our whiskies. It's a lockdown, to make sure actually giving the whiskey even more time is slightly better, because the whiskies will be there when we eventually come out. But it's a matter of looking and searching, because you consumers, particularly in America, are becoming so demanding. I mean, we go back to 1997, 1998, particularly 1998, November, when the first Whiskey Fest took place. And now if Bill and I turn around with a Glenmorangie 10-year-old or a Jura 10-year-old or a, Dalmore 12-year-old at one of these whiskey festivals, we'll be shot now, because they're looking for something different, something innovative, something they've not seen before. And that's what we're doing all the time to make sure that we're up there and giving people some pleasure that they've not seen before.
It has been pointed out that I'm probably the worst dressed person on the screen right now, and that was pointed out by the boss upstairs, who points out, do we always wear ties to taste scotch?
Well,
some people, I can tell you that I'm
say to me, I've heard quite often that actually you should actually loosen your collar when you do tasting. But I'm sorry, for the last 50 odd years, I've always worn this. It's just the way I am. I know it might not meet everybody's satisfaction, but when you actually have a lot of business in the Far East, particularly Japan, you must make sure that you're properly dressed, because it's a respect to that country. And it's something that I adhere to. And I'm not going to change now. I've got my, my matching handkerchief and everything else that goes with it. That's just the way I am. I might annoy a lot of people. If you're going to do something like the presentation of Dalmore, the presentation of whiskey, you must get it right. So the presentation of you personally it should be added to that.
And what I was going to say, Mark,
in the UK. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, what I was going to say actually is that, Richard and I are both working from home just now. So this is us actually dressing down, what you see here this evening. This is us in our casual, relaxed mode. You should see us when we really dress up.
Well, Joanne McInnes said, hello from Canada, two of the most interesting personalities from the Scotch world. She wants to know if you're wearing trousers or sweatpants with those lovely jackets and ties.
Yes, I'm wearing trousers. Everything else is here. Yeah, no problem.
Bill, I don't want to know.
I could stand up and demonstrate. The good news is, Mark, I am wearing trousers.
Thank you. And Bill's running buddy, David Blackmore, wants to know if Richard wears a tie and pocket square to bed. David, come on.
No, I'll tell you a secret. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't wear anything. It's a habit I've always had. I don't wear pajamas or cravats or anything. like to go. Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to know that.
Yes.
That's too much information, Richard. One of the fun things that I've seen a lot of people doing I've seen a few stories on this over the last few weeks while we've been in lockdown, is people creating these infinity bottles with taking the heels out of whatever blends, or out of whatever whiskeys they have, and putting them in a bottle and blending them together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's a train wreck. You two are among the most accomplished blenders in the Scotch whiskey industry. If somebody's going to create an infinity bottle, what would you tell them about blending whiskeys together that the average person would just not understand, or that needs to know to create something that you can drink?
I mean, I guess the simple answer and the first thing I would say is just don't. Because, you could end up choosing whiskies which are just not complementary at all. And, Richard knows this better than me. As a blender with 50 years experience, you do have to choose very carefully what whiskey you're putting into a blend. So, infinity bottles can be a bit of fun. It's a little bit like gambling. You don't quite know what you'll get out of it. But, personally, I would say don't just drink and enjoy them on their own.
Richard?
Yeah, I totally agree with Bill. If you're gonna, if you're gonna do blending, you've got to know the personalities, the characters, because not all are compatible, and you've really got to have that time we blend together. We're talking about 35, 36 different component parts from the lowlands, the highlands, the Campbells, and the Islays, but they're all chosen over years that we know that all these respective whiskies can harmonize with each other. And that's what it is. It's getting that harmony. If you just choose something willy-nilly, you could end up saying, oh, what's that? And it's a lot of money just going tossed down the drain. So I would say, if you'll pardon the expression, leave the blending to us and just you stick to what's in the bottle.
Sounds good to me. We have a question for Bill now from Law School Drunk. Bill, will we ever see more Glenmorangie 15-year-old? And I want to amplify on that because last year you made a couple of changes in your core range with Nectar d'Or and Quinto Ruban. How do you decide what age you're going to release whiskeys and when you're going to release a 15-year-old and when you got to shake up that core range? What do you do to go into that process? And what thoughts go into that? Is that marketing driven? Is that you driven based on stocks? What goes into it?
Yeah. Okay, that's a very big question. It's maybe about 10 questions all rolled up together in there. I mean, the simple answer to that is, in terms of the age that a whiskey is released at, it should be an age which reflects particular personality or character in the whiskey. And if I choose a Glenmorangie range, we bottle it at 10 years old, we have 12 years old, we have 14s, we have 16s, we have 18s, and most of these are matured or finished in different cask types to bring out different aspects of their personality. So what I would say is that while I work hand in hand with my friends in our marketing department, by and large, these decisions are not merely marketing driven, and they're driven by whatever particular whiskies I have maturing in Billy's big secret cupboard at any one time. So, it really is to do with when we believe the whiskey reaches perfection and it is worth bottling. To go right back to the question about the 15-year-old, which we had in the range, maybe about 10 to 15 years ago, I'm not actually planning in bottling that again. However, we do have a new range of whiskies in our travel retail channel. Now, obviously, that's a channel which is not available to people for the time being, and for obvious the very right reasons. But this will come back, and what I would say there is that the 14-year-old whiskey in that range is made in pretty much the same way as the old Glenmorangie 15-year-old, in that it's finished for the final year in virgin charred oak, so it's a very similar taste profile. So I hope I've answered most of the parts of that big question there.
Richard, how do you decide what goes into travel retail? I know you just released a Jura 44-year-old from 1977 that went into Asian travel retail just the other day.
Well, like the Jura and like the Dalmore, we have to experiment with casks that are going to be innovative, that are going to draw in the consumer. So we're always looking for casks that will provide that style, but not overcome it. Remember, when you get Dalmore, the DNA of Dalmore is that lovely, rich chocolate orange with that hint of spice, but it's that orange peel at the end. So whether I use, the sherries or the wines, it cannot dominate it. So we are looking, at expressions that are going to fulfill the expectation of our consumer, which is now becoming very demanding. So, the 44-year-old Jura was one that was very special to me. We had matured that in Apostoli's 30-year-old Gonzalez Baez sherry. It's a peak of perfection, almost at natural strength there, rather beautiful. But it should have been launched some time ago before that, but it still reflects what the quality is all about. And it's the same, when we recently launched the Dalmore 51 years old, these are expressions that are rare, not big, rather small additions, but nevertheless help to highlight that. But travel retail is what we're really trying to concentrate, and which gives us the greatest concern at the present moment, because nobody knows when traveling is going to commence. But we will keep continuing feeding in, filling in the additions with different sherry styles, particular for all our products, that will hopefully captivate the expectation of our consumers, as I said.
And I know with that Jura, the 1977, there were only 21 decanters of it, so that makes it pretty much a logical thing to put into a travel retail, because you can put a couple of those at several different airports and put those into the market where you couldn't really put them into a specific country or into general retail, because that's essentially a rounding error on the Whyte and Mackay books when it comes to 21 bottles, right?
Yeah. I mean, the travel retail, the consumer that is traveling, and Bill will support this, I know, because they're very demanding. And when you've got limited editions like the ones you've mentioned, it's very important to place it in some particular airport that you know where the demand is. But more importantly also, is it going to then reflect not just the age of the product, but your other products? Your standard Glenmorangie, your standard Ardbeg, your standard Jura. These are all reflections. And when we get people saying, oh, there's not an age statement on it, doesn't matter. We work tirelessly to get the absolute finest quality out there. But we must tell the consumer, don't knock it back. Hold it long in the mouth, top of the tongue, underneath, back in the middle, for at least 30 seconds. Because it's taken us years to create these expressions. The worst thing is to see this being knocked back. Sip it, savor it every second.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm loving what Rich was saying there about having that unique thread going through it. And, that's something I try and do with my Glenmorangie and Ardbeg whiskies, irrespective of the age or the cask type. I always like there to be one or two key markers there which make them recognizable as the brands they are. And, I was interested to hear what you were saying about Dalmore, Richard, because to me, it's that orange breakfast marmalade thing that I look for in Dalmore. With Glenmorangie, it's the peachy and citrusy fruit and a little bit of vanilla. And with Ardbeg, it's the integration of the smoke along with these nice herbal top notes, which set it apart. And, that's something to build on what Richard said. We put a lot of work and a lot of effort into trying to maintain that, which means that the cask selection is critically important. So, filling Glenmorangie's new spirit straight into heavy sherry cask is not necessarily the way I would do it, because you do tend to lose some of that unique house character. Whereas for certain other brands, they can withstand that quite well. So I absolutely know where you're coming from with that comment, Richard.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to remember, Mark, the consumer today, unlike, say, 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, is so demanding. It's people like yourself, Mark, that have gone out there, created these podcasts and given people a better education. Yeah, you'll always get the, I hate that word, the anoraks that will come in and just drink, or what have you. But there are many out there, they'll say, what's the diameter of your pot still? What barley are you using? Is it Concerto? Is it Lorette or what have you? What's the age of your, there are really intense questions because people want to know the answers. And if you give them the wrong answer, I'm an ambassador. Well, if you're Mr. Ambassador, you better answer the question correctly. Otherwise, you're dead.
Yeah, that's right. Blame the media. Blame us for it, Richard. It's okay. We have a great question from Aaron Prost. Do either of you have a particular part of the creative process where you enjoy experimenting more than the others? Experimenting with casks, finishes, yeasts, as in the Glenmorangie Alta, finishes, grains, and etc. He knows you're both blenders, but is there another part of the process that you really enjoy leaning into? I think that's a great question.
Okay, maybe I'll kick off then, if you don't mind, Richard. Obviously, most of the success I've had, particularly with the Glenmorangie range, has been experimenting with wood and maturation. And arguably, that is the part of the process which will have the most impact on the final flavour of your product. So it does give you the opportunity to play tunes with your flavour profile and introduce new flavours. So that's always the go-to technique. From a personal perspective, the part of the process which absolutely fascinates me the most is of course the fermentation. And last year you saw the first of many experiments we've been carrying out at both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, where we're looking at all sorts of different aspects of the fermentation. And, for anyone who knows my history and background, it's a bit of an obvious answer because that's what I studied my PhD thesis on, was yeast and fermentation. And, I think we're not alone. I know that many of our fellow distillers in Scotland have also experimented with a fermentation. So I think that's probably going to be the next big thing in terms of seeing interesting new flavors and new releases.
Richard?
The thing that I love without hesitation is similar to what Bill is talking about, but it's all about the cask. Never forget, and I say this quite openly and passionately, if you want character, you have to get the right cask, and it will contribute almost up to 80% to nurture your spirit. So you must be looking at all these different casks. And what I do, and the part that I love the most, is twice a year, normally March and October, maybe September, depending on if I'm not traveling, I will go up with Margaret, Greg, and I to Invergordon Distillery, and we will stay up there sometimes the whole week, sometimes for 3 days, some for 2 days, depending on what we've got to do. And we will know somewhere in the region of 2, 3, maybe 4,000 casks. And you sort of say, what? Yeah, because we've got all these experiments going on. I've been to the different wine countries, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, what have you, Sauvignon Blanc even, and all these different wines, cognacs, brandies, etc., are all being nurtured. And I have to make a decision. Both Greg and I have to say, well, is this ready? Is this not ready? But I can tell you when something is ready, and Bill will know this, when you put it in and up there and it's ready, it will hit you like a beautiful diamond. Wow, this is something that's now shining. It was a little bit dormant before, but by giving it an extra year, 2 years, it's now something beautiful. How do I know it's beautiful? We'll then bottle it, and then we'll put it into the International Wine Spirit Competition, and then we'll win a medal. And you say, actually, the decisions we've made for over the last 5, 6 years were correct. But this is a long-term process. Remember, maturing whiskey is not overnight. We're not talking about 3 weeks in Cabernet Sauvignon or a month in Merlot. We're talking about 2, 3, 4 years and waiting for that nurturing to come together in perfect harmony. But it's well worth the wait. So that's the part I really love the most, to see the development, the maturation coming to fruition.
Bill, do you have a follow-up on that?
Richard, building on that, I'm smiling here because to a certain extent, Richard and I are a thorn in the side of our wonderful teams at the distilleries, because the sampling of the maturing cask is critically important, and it's the only way you can genuinely tell when your whiskey's ready for bottling. So that involves the teams in the warehouses drawing thousands of samples for us. And, thank you very much, ladies and gents in the teams, for doing that. Without that, we couldn't do the jobs we do as well as we do them.
And Bill, can I just say, Bill is actually hitting something, because quite often, I know Bill and I have talked about this, quite often we'll phone up, Grangemouth, or more importantly, we'll phone up Invergordon and said, listen, Paul Majeski, Paul Austin will say, Paul, I'm sorry, I need a cask. And they'll come back and say, but Richard, we need to move 300, 400 casks to get the one you want. Can we give you another one? No. And but I said, no buts. We have to do that. And I know, Bill, sometimes you can't get into them. You drill holes in the cask as well. We have sometimes to do that to save a bit of time. But it's just that Bill and I are seeing exactly what we want, so that that the quality is of paramount importance to put out into the market.
Well, Richard, you can't say no butts, because you guys bottle in butts or barrel in butts. So there's butts and hogsheads and all sorts of fun things.
And just in case Richard's comment there is worrying any of the audience watching this, or any of our consumers, when you drill the hole into the cask, you do fill it in with a little spile, a wooden spile, which pretty much seals it again. So,
Richard, you mentioned Greg, and let's explain here, because Greg Glass is your assistant whiskey maker, whatever you want to call it, the heir apparent, the crown prince of Whyte and Mackay, if you want to call it that, when it comes to whiskey making, just as Brendan McCarran is now Bill's heir apparent at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. Part of when you're running a family business, or when you're running any kind of business, especially during this time of period with the pandemic, succession planning really becomes kind of important here. Richard, I know it took you a few years to identify a potential successor, and I know you went through a couple of potentials over the years, Bill. How do you decide who's going to take on that mantle of preparing for the future and training them? I look at what David Stewart did with Kelsey McKechnie at the Ballot.
It's a very difficult situation, and it has taken many years. It took us about 2 years before we managed to get Greg to come. Greg was with previously Compass Box, but he originated obviously from the Black Isle, opposite Dalmore Distillery. And there were things that we had at the first interview, second interview, and then we took him for dinner to put him in a relaxed atmosphere. But what's shown out more than anything, he loved history. He loved, getting things right. He loved working with wood and all these kind of things that really shone out. But more importantly, he had 120% passion for the product. And that's what I really was looking for. But someone who would possibly listen and carry on the mantle when I'm no longer there. And that's what he's doing. So he's been with us now coming up 4 years, and he's nurturing the spirit, but he's nurturing that passion, and it has never diminished. So that's what I really like about Greg. And we're looking, obviously to strengthen the team. Margaret, I have to say, who's been with me for over 40 years, is, behind the desk doing all the controlling of the stocks. It's a very tight team, but it's a family at the end of the day. And, people don't realize that what you're talking about, a family. It has to be a family. We have to have that bond of friendship, but that drive of continual passion to make our products the best we possibly can.
Bill?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Mark, and I'm smiling here because I'm not planning on hanging up my test tube and my Valinge anytime soon. So we're not looking for a replacement immediately. We recruited Brendan, as you said, a number of years ago. He joined us from Diageo. Before that, we recruited Gillian MacDonald in my team, who joined us from Penderyn. They're both key members of the team. And, you know, by working with these people over many years, you get to know their strengths and their specialties. And in the same way, they get to understand the ethos of production, the ethos of creation at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. So, you know, obviously no decision has been made yet, but, you know, when the time comes, I would like to think that we've got the right options in place to make a choice. That's the best I can say at this stage.
Well, you have
Bill will tell you that these people are not readily available. You have to search, and search. You can get a lot of people, but they won't all have the same attributes. And that's why you can get them at a certain age on certain times and nurture them and grow them, let them go with you. That's what it's about.
Richard, we have a question for you here, and it comes from our pal Billy Layton at Irish Distillers. Have you ever tried driving a Land Rover whilst blindfolded?
God bless you, Billy. I love you. All right. You know, this is a private joke because when we were up at Glenlivet, we had to do this assault course, and I think Billy was with me and said, right, you got to be blindfolded driving a Land Rover, and we nearly crashed the Land Rover, but we had a great time afterwards. It was one of these great moments, I can tell you that. Well done, Billy. That's good to hear again.
So, Bill, what's the craziest thing that's ever happened to you on one of these little experiences? I know something about a suit in a boot, but that's about all I've heard about it.
Yeah, the suit in a boot is a genuine story, but I think that's more our colleague, Mr. Blackmore, who would be able to talk to you about that. I think one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me, and of course, a lot of my colleagues said, oh, Bill, the reason that happened was you were drunk as a skunk, which, you know, may or may not have been true. But it was while I was working on the wonderful Mount Vernon distillery project, where myself and John Campbell from Lafroig and Andy Cant from Cardew at that time went over to work with Dave Pickerill, the late great Dave, at the Mount Vernon distillery. And on the first night, we were all staying in nice lodges on the ground near the distillery. And on the first night, I went back to my lodge and decided to pop outside, actually to smoke a cheeky little cigar. And I was sitting on the bench outside my lodge, and this was probably at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was suddenly aware of something tugging at my jeans. Now, before you say anything, Richard, yes, I know, I am well used to people tugging at my jeans. I get that. But I looked down, and believe it or not, Mark, there was a little skunk there tugging at the bottom of my jeans. So I guess the little creature was hungry or something. But I know what happens if you upset a skunk. So I stood up and edged backwards through a fug of cigar smoke and alcohol, I have to say, just managed to sneak in the door of my lodge. The skunk came to follow, so I put my foot out and nudged his little face back and slammed the door shut. So that's certainly one of the more unusual things that's happened to me. And obviously, it's one of the things that I can happily talk about on a family show like this.
Yeah, it's a dysfunctional family show, but it is a family show. Anthony Kim asks, this is a perfect time to discuss both Dalmore in an Ardbeg cask finish and Ardbeg in a Dalmore cask finish. Elbow cough, elbow cough. So what do you think that would taste like on either side, guys?
Well, I know Bill's done this already because actually we've both done it already, but we don't tell anybody. We quite often will take Isla casks and we'll mature, certain individual single malts in them to see what kind of influence we can get. We all can do our own peated Glenmorangies or peated Juras, Fetacairns, but sometimes to get an influence from Islay and vice versa is all part of it. It might not give you what you're looking for, but there will be a difference with the experimentation, and you'll look always for the highlights. It's getting that balance. It's a very good question, because the Ardbeg has got that smoky, that ruggedness of salinity that only Ardbeg can give the from. So it's a matter of getting it, how long do I give it before it starts overpowering my single malt? It's about keeping the balance. That's what's important.
No, it's terrific question, and quite obviously, finishing another whiskey, particular something with a degree of finesse like Dalmore or Glenmorangie in an ex-Ardbeg cask, guess what? You're going to pick up a little bit of the influence of the very peaty, smoky Ardbeg. Doing it the other way round, if you were finishing an Ardbeg in a Dalmore cask, you would pick up the influence of the wood, but not necessarily the influence of the whiskey itself. And I think the more interesting experiment, and I will neither confirm nor deny we've actually done this, would be finishing a Glenmorangie in an ex-Dalmore cask. I think you're more likely to pick up something from that.
Yeah, you've always got to look at, it's like getting the character. It's getting that balance, because sometimes, say, for instance, a Speyside like Tamnavulin, we've got a lot of wine finishes, Tempranillo, Pinot Noir, etc., that are going in. It's getting that gentleness of that Speyside to be caressing it. If you get something that's too heavy, it will just dominate it and flavor. So it's getting, sorry, somebody put something off there. It's getting a balance and making sure that the character can really come through.
We have a question from Mike Raymond now. Are there any rituals y'all go through before blending whiskeys for bottling? Mike is from Houston, hence the y'all. Yeah. You guys don't sacrifice a chicken or anything like that before you do a blending, right? Or any kind of ritual or any kind of tradition or superstitions?
No, absolutely not. We don't sacrifice a chicken. That's far too run-of-the-mill and far too mundane for us. Our rituals are far more complicated than that. No,
yeah,
Mike,
we've got to keep.
Good evening.
That's what we're going to do.
It's an excellent question, and I think the nearest thing I have to a ritual is to just take some time and chill. And I like to chill for about half an hour or before actually getting into the blending laboratory, just to get myself ready for it. Maybe chill with one of my favorite episodes of Family Guy or something like that. That gets me in the mood for it.
Richard?
Well, the ritual that I go through, you're constantly looking to see you've got it right. And quite often we will take the sample, actually, we'll nose it and be satisfied. We'll leave it for an hour, 2 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, up to 56 hours in that glass. We'll let it almost evaporate, but we'll nose it every day and make sure, we've actually nurtured that cask and it's gone through everything. It's I can't emphasize, I know a lot of people won't appreciate this, but when you actually blend a whiskey or even do a single malt, because it's all about doing the different casks, there's nothing more wonderful than bringing all these component parts together that you think in your mind, will this give me this style? And when it fulfills that and goes beyond that, it's so rewarding. You get such a buzz to say, that's exactly what I'm looking for. But as Bill has said, but don't let it overpower the character. Always retain the original character, your DNA. Although I dress up, put a tie, do the handkerchief and everything else, the character is still the same, and that's what's so important.
We have a great question from Gary Haggart, who's the distillery manager at Lindoris Abbey Distillery. He wants to know, apart from your brand's core casks, is there anything you would really like to fill into that's not currently in your portfolios? What casks have you not experimented with yet that you'd like to get into your portfolio?
You know, from the smile on both our faces, Gary, you'll work out that, yes, there are some very definite things that we would love to fill into. But, you know, I don't want to name any names here because, you know, I'm a very youthful 59 years old, and I live in hope that one day before I retire, I'll get my sticky hands on everything I ever wanted to fill into. So I can't honestly really answer that question. I'm sorry.
Richard?
Well, you know, Gary knows this already because he spent some time with us. We're constantly looking at new innovations. And I'll tell you right now, when I go to my marketing department and say, this is what we're coming up with, and they'll say, what's that? I said, it's something unusual. And I said, but I've never heard of it. Well, that's why we've taken it. But what comes back, these experiments we will only release when we know that it fulfills our needs. But more importantly, will it give a genuine story, and will it give us the quality? So there are many things that we're looking at. And I have to take my hat off to the Scotch Whisky Association for at last agreeing to experiment with casks, keeping the color, keeping the character of whiskey. But it has opened us and allowed us to look at perhaps more casks in the future with different styles. And I'm talking about all around the world. And you know, sometimes you will only pick up one note from a particular cask of wine or what have you, but that one note can utterly transform. It can bind in with the character of your single malt and help to, you know, enhance its beauty even more. But it takes time, and you must be very patient. So yeah, like Bill, we've got a lot in, but we can't say anything at the present moment.
Great question from Bob Wending, our pal at Maltstock. Have you ever encountered a cask that was meant for blending that was so surprising and special and good that you kept it apart? What whiskey, what cask, and what did you keep it apart for?
Well, can I just say that's a wonderful question, because it brings back so many happy memories for me personally. Is I you know, many years ago, and still do to this day, I know a lot of whiskies all the time that are going into the blends. But in the early days with Whyte Mackay in the 70s and the 80s, and especially in the 80s, I used to blend a lot of aged whiskies, 21, 30 years old. And when the casks were so good, I said, no, that is really exceptional. I kept them back. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And eventually the stock manager said, what are you doing with all these casks, Richard? And then in 1994, the 500th anniversary of Scotch Whisky in 1494 came up, and we had to submit a blend of the finest whiskies for that competition. And that was when I used all these casks that I'd kept back for many, many years, and I was able to blend them together, and I finished off in an Apostolese sherry. And it was a momentous occasion. Sadly, my father had died in 1994, and that curtailed the sort of joy, because our whiskey actually won that night. But it's a reminder of my father, but it's a reminder of just what you've been saying, keeping back whiskies that are great for the right time, right place. Same as what's drinking. You'll have a lot of whiskies behind you, lots of bottles there, and you will only drink them at the right time, right place with the people that you love. And that's the same with, you know, these moments that are very special.
Bill?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question. And, you know, part of me wants to say that, you know, you taste or knows all the individual casks going into your blend, whether it's a blend of barrels for a single malt or an actual blended Scotch whisky. And if you do find something that you believe is exceptionally good, my gut feel is that if you then take this away, you're kind of thinning out the rest of the population that's going into the recipe that you're trying to create. So it's a tricky one. But yes, it does occasionally happen. And my favorite example of that was a beautiful 1981 single bourbon hogshead of Glenmorangie that I discovered when I joined Glenmorangie at the start of '95 as distillery manager. And, you know, this whiskey was going to be destined to go into a vatting for the beautiful Glenmorangie 18-year-old, but it was one of the most sublime single malts I had ever tasted. And I felt that it encapsulated absolutely everything that the Glenmorangie brand stood for, what the whiskey should be. So, you know, I was distillery manager in these days. I didn't have as much control over things as I have today, but I fought, I begged to have this barrel saved. And myself and my head warehouseman at that time, a gentleman called Jockey Stout, using a Boots home winemaking filter and a weights and measured approved measuring flask, we hand bottled that entire single cask, and that became my first ever distillery manager's choice. So it's probably one of the most precious bottles. I've still got 2 bottles left in my collection. So that was an example of something like that actually happening.
Great question from Alana Sadovsky, and I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right. I would love to learn the art of blending one day. So how can somebody who's not working in the industry learn the art of whiskey blending?
Well, you know, she needs to do is to come over to Scotland, and we'll spend some time in the sample room, and we'll show you all the different characters that come from the Lowlands, Highlands, Campbellton, and Islas. And you know, as long as you give us plenty of notice, we'll kind of look after you. But after you've left us, which normally will take about 2 hours, you'll have a great idea of what it's all about. But it's finding these different component parts, working with them, but seeing how they harmonize with each other. It's like a partnership, like your wife, your mother and father, etc., you know, that's taken years for them to get together, sort out their differences, and then they fall in love. It's the same with your partner. You fall in love, you get engaged, and then you get married. Well, it's the same with the whiskies. And that's not anything bad or anything. That's how the whiskies work, is finding them, how they come together. I keep mentioning this loving union, because it must be compatibility, but it's experimenting. It's working with what you've done in the past. The reins that Bill and I have taken on are not just ourselves. It's what was instigated many years ago by those before us. And even our forefathers, people question what they did in the 19th century, and then they find out, actually, they did it pretty good, but they didn't have the technology then. So it's all these things, but working and, learning, that's what it is all about. You might not be able to come, but there are these whiskey sets. You can buy them online and just experiment with them and see, when you add one component with another, how they come together. But the best thing is, as I say, come to Scotland, and if there's time, see it for yourself in our sample room.
Bill?
Yep. I would say the best way to approach this is, if someone really does have the genuine desire to go into the position as a blender or a trainee blender, the first thing we would do is subject the person to a series of tests to test whether or not they have a good nose and palate. And, there's a lot of very well-known and sort of standard industry tests we use to test people for this sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, if the person is tested and then it turns out they don't necessarily have a good nose and palate, then that would probably indicate fairly early on that a career in blending is not the right choice for that person. So that's the first thing I would do. The good news is that obviously there's lots of other areas in the Scotch whisky industry, lots of great technical jobs where you don't necessarily have to use your nose and palate. But unless you do have a good nose and palate to start off with, it's probably not going to happen. And I'm sure Richard, when he was a little boy, many years ago.
Oh, be nice, Bill.
Like myself, I was like a little dog when I was a little boy and used to go around sniffing everything. It got me a few good kicks from people, I have to say. But basically, you've got to have a good nose and palate to start off with.
Yeah, and the simple things like people don't believe us, but what was the weather like today? What's happening outside? Before I open the curtains, is it dry? Is it damp?
Yep.
And then somebody passes me in the street, not now, keeping our distance, of course, but in an airport, on a plane, they pass me. I count 1, 2, 3, and then go, smell them. And people don't believe this. We are smelling all the time. Even when I pick up a cup of tea every day, you're smelling, and we've got the right amount of water or sugar, milk or what have you. And are the vegetables fresh? Is this? It's part of life, and that's what blending is about. Yeah. You've got these harmonizations, but keep the character. That's what it's about.
No, it's very true, Richard, that we just can't stop doing that. You do it naturally in almost everything we do every day. We're always sensing something.
Okay, Alona, I'll tell you what, you email me, I'll give you their email addresses, and you can set up a blending session with them in Glasgow or Edinburgh if you can get over there. We had a one-word comment from Ishai Kleinman, Paxaret. Mm-hmm. You missed the ability to use Paxaret in whiskeys, or was it overrated? And we probably should explain what Paxaret is. And Richard, you probably had a little more experience with this than Bill did, just because of your lengthy experience in the industry.
Well, Paxaret came from Spain. It was a sherried wine, a bit like an Oloroso, and we used to buy it and bring it in. And when we put a blend in, it was usually 1 pint for every 60 gallons, sometimes 1 pint for every 100 gallons. And what we believed at that time, and it did add a little flavor, because we couldn't get consistent sherry casks. Remember, we're talking way back in the 60s, 1960s, when these were used. So the variation in casks from Spain giving you consistent sherry was no longer there. But this Paxaret managed to help that. But then the new laws came in and said any addition of adding anything like that to a whiskey could no longer be called Scotch whisky. So around about 1970, it was actually stopped. But by 1970, cask management was coming into force, and the sherry casks were at last coming more available, but more on a consistent basis. So it did work well during these early years. But I have to say, after the war years, the 50s, many of these whiskies that you drank in a bar were quite harsh. And this Paxaret just gave it a softer degree, a more acceptable palate. That's long gone, because I'd like to think we're far more professional, we're far more innovative, and we've substituted it, and that's why it's no longer necessary. But a lovely word to remind me of the past era.
Bill?
Yep, as Richard said, Paxaret was dying a death pretty much before my time in the industry. So I've never had the experience of using it. And as Richard said, it's completely outlawed now. And the good news is that the supply of sherry casks from Spain is so good and so consistent that we've got it really good in the Scotch whisky industry. And that's primarily because a lot of the casks are actually laying down specifically for us in Scotland. So we're getting exactly what we want. So there's no need for Paxaret or anything like that.
I mean, the wood management, Mark, today, I mean, a great question. You've no idea. It's turned up on its head to give us the style. Bill will go, Ozark Mountain Range in Missouri. Where does it come from? It comes from this part. Where do your cask come from? It comes from Spain. No, that's no good. We want to know everything about that cask. How long's the wine been in it? How long the Solera system? It's very much, what's your sherry? Is it 75% Palomino Fino, 25% Pedro Jimenez? Is it going to give you that style that you're looking for? We have to know that history now. But before, it wasn't really known.
Let me ask a serious question for a second here and turn this just a little bit serious for a second. You guys have been on the road for many, many years, going around the world teaching people about whiskey. Have you had to change the way that you approach master classes to, shall we say, tone things down a bit from what might have been more socially acceptable references in the past, more ribald comments that might have been acceptable in the past that are no longer acceptable. Have you guys had to change the way that you present whiskeys and the way you talk about whiskeys?
You would imagine that would be the case, Mark, that we should be a lot less ribald than we actually are. But both Richard and myself are well known that part of our stage act is, we like a bit of humour, a little bit of ribaldry from time to time. But, seriously, the main thing I've noticed that has changed is that audiences are so much more discerning, so much more demanding, and have a much, much deeper understanding and knowledge of whiskey. So I would say the content of our master classes has really gone up in terms of sophistication, in terms of the technical detail. And, you really, really must prepare well for these trips, because the likelihood is there will be people in your audience who know almost as much as you do about the subject you're talking about.
Absolutely. I have to say, no matter where we go in the world, all audiences are different. And you ask a comedian, a great comedian in America or Britain, how did he learn his trade? He went from one place to another, and he got booed off the stage. He got bad rep, feedback, etc. Well, we've gone through that. We've gone through when 600 people, 1,000 people will turn up, and then other people who didn't arrange it, sometimes 5 people turn up. What happened? So everyone's different. But over the years, we have had to sometimes tone it down, but we have to make a mark. We have to make a mark so that people will remember. But more importantly, yeah, he might have thrown whiskey on the carpet or what have you, but when it came to talking about his Dalmore Jura Fedicare, especially his Dalmore, you could tell the passion that guy had for it, because he would live and die for it to make sure the quality was sacrosanct. When it comes to the photographs, I used to, people come up, let's have a photograph, and you'd put your arm around the person. You can't do that anymore. You can't even touch the person because it might be misconstrued. So these are things that are sad in a way, but that's the nature of the beast. And as Bill said, we have to work with the audience, but we have to know our facts. So when I go to, America, wherever part of the world, I'll learn about the history. I'll learn about, today's the 6th of May. 6th of May, the official date when the Eiffel Tower was became right, when the black was issued for the first time in 1840. All these kind of things, but you have to do your homework because the audience is special. And I'm not mean audience, I'm talking about every individual person that's there is very special. And sometimes Bill and I are so busy, we cannot always give the time to these individuals who travel thousands of miles sometimes just to meet you. And, it's very sad when, somebody is there and you only have a handshake and then you're pulled off and have to see somebody else.
Good question here from Frotman number 1. The blending mastery, is it more chemistry or instinctual type of work? Are you guided by chemistry knowledge of compounds, or is it more sensual, or both? Is it an art or a science, I think is the way to boil the question down.
It's a very interesting question. And funnily enough, I was discussing this very same topic with the wonderful Ian Wisniewski today, who conducted a little interview over the phone with me. I think it just depends on who you're speaking to and what their own particular approach is. But for me personally, it's much more about instinct and feeling and craft and creativity. And, I've got a PhD in biochemistry, blah, blah, blah. So I'm a scientist by training, and there's no question the science has helped me understand a lot of what's going on inside the barrel, inside the mash tun, etc., etc. But I honestly believe to make truly great whiskey, I think it's much more to do with art and craft and instinct and feeling and creativity. And I have absolutely no doubt that Richard, I know Richard feels the same, but, I'll pass over to you to speak now, Richard.
Yeah. I mean, what we do, the two actually on many occasions go hand in hand. What I love about it is that it's there, because when we actually do the blend, we put everything together. Sometimes we have to say, wait a minute, there's something going on here. And then we bring in the analyst to say, these are the kind of notes I'm picking up. Analytically, can you add anything to it? So it's a matter of working hand in hand with each other. But at the end of the day, it's actually our creation. It's what we should know about it, but we must have the backup, to give us the consistency. An analysis is okay, but remember, like any analysis, the analysis did on, certain criteria, you can fudge, but it's making sure that you get the genuine analysis of what you're actually looking for, but working in harmony again to make sure that you've got it there in the background if it's needed.
And can I just add something else in there, Mark? That we all work in companies where we've got very well equipped analytical laboratories. We've got gas chromatography, we've got high performance liquid chromatography, we've got atomic absorption spectroscopy, etc., etc. And that's all great. It's all pretty cool and pretty exciting to a scientist. But at the end of the day, the two most important tools, analytical tools in the world of whiskey or wine or beer are this and this. Your nose and your palate. And that's what your customers, your consumers are going to judge your product on. By and large, I don't think too many of our consumers are going to get their bottle of Dalmore 12-year-old or Glenmorangie 10-year-old, rush home and inject it into a gas chromatogram. They're probably not going to do that. But what they might just do is pour a nice big dram of it, maybe add a wee splash of water, and then get this and this to work on it.
Okay, let's just take that to the next level. Richard, when you were doing the Shackleton recreation a few years ago, how much of it was the science and the tools, and how much of it was the senses?
When we did it originally, way back in 2011, it was all done on the nose. When we injected the needle into that bottle that had been under the ice for 103 years. We injected it, we took the strength of it, 47.3% alcohol, and then nosed it over that 56-hour period. Then what I did was took me nearly 7, 8, 9 weeks to put all the component parts and then put it together. Lots of experimentation. And only when I got it right, then we brought in the GLC analysis, because Dave Broom was with me and asked me the same question, how is it together? And I said, well, here's the GLC analysis on mine, here it is in the old one. And the similarities were there, but it was all done on looking to see exactly how we can manipulate it and to replicate what that great man way back, in 1907 went to the South Pole to try and get there, and then to drink whiskey in the same degree. But remember, he was drinking whiskey away down when the temperature dropped to minus 40, 100-mile-an-hour winds, the smell of penguins outside, Adelaide penguins, and the smell of 15 other men. It was all part of it, but it really reflects of the sort of style and the stamina and the character of these men that has such great courage to try and go where no man had been before.
I almost thought you were describing the nose there of the new Dalmore whiskey, Richard, the smell of penguins and 15 other men.
Don't give me that. You just keep your 15 other men to the men of tea, okay?
Okay, Richard, I got to ask, How much of that original Shackleton whiskey from 103 years under the ice do you still have in your collection in Glasgow? Because I know you kept at least a little bit of it.
I've actually, and this is fair because our New Zealand government were very good to us. We got, if viewers don't know, or listeners don't know, we got only 3 bottles and we had to analyze it. And all 3 bottles were opened. And, it took many, many long weeks of analysis. And it's James Pride and his men up there at the distillery, has said everything. I mean, I must commend Dr. James Pride for the work that he did behind the scenes. He really worked, but we were able to determine really great things, that there was possibly wine cask. It had been cleaned out by a certain detergent. There were certain fibers from, the dry material, and the certain barleys that came from Orkney, all these kind of things. The analysis that was not available in 1907 managed to reveal so many things. But one thing that stood out more than anything is our forefathers, and I've already mentioned this before, knew exactly why 47.3% alcohol. Why? Because it will not freeze. Although it had been under the ice for 107 years, 2 cases and 11 bottles to be precise, not one of them had actually frozen, because it would have to have been minus 40, 41, whereas the average temperature was a minus about 25 to 30, so it preserved the whiskey. And that's why our forefathers knew at 47.3% alcohol, the whiskey would be safe under the ice and a perfect way to drink, always on a Saturday night when Ernest Shackleton did the big toast. To women and sweethearts, may they never meet. Wives and sweethearts never meet.
I have to admit, Richard, that I am jealous of Dave Broom, because he got to taste that original and I never did.
Yeah.
That's one I'd love to taste. Yeah. The originals, that's one of the whiskeys on my bucket list that I would love to have tasted one day.
Unbelievable. I mean, Mark, I can't believe, when I talk about Ernest Shackleton, the man that tried to get to the South Pole, he finished on the 9th of January, 1909. He got within 97 miles, but he got back, got all his men safe, but he drank the whiskey, and we were part of that great era. But the whiskey is very special because it just relives history and elevates a man that has such great courage and determination.
Great question here from Stuart Carson. Barley, terroir, do they matter?
Yep, I think the simple answer to that is yes, they certainly do matter. And the very fact that Scotch whisky is made from cereals grown in Scotland obviously has some sort of impact on the final character of the product. But what I would say is that after distillation and then many, many years maturing in casks, and especially if you're choosing a very richly flavored cask, like a sherry cask or a port cask or something like that, the difference and the influence of the terroir probably is less and less as you age your whiskies. So I do think it's important. I do think it's there. And, 2 of my experimental Glenmorangie whiskies, To Sail, using the floor malted Maris Otter barley, and Alta, using the wild yeast from the Cadball barley. These were my attempts to try and show that terroir does have a bit of an influence on the character. And again, if you compared these 2 whiskies to the control experiment, which essentially was Glenmorangie Original, the 10-year-old, the differences were not huge, but they were there. So yes, I think there's something to be said for that. But we're never, ever, in my opinion, going to notice it as much as you do as the influence that terroir has in wine, for example. And as I say, it's this distillation and long maturation process, I think we lose a little bit of the influence of terroir.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, the terroir and the barley, especially the barley more than anything, is what gives the character. We've got barley fields around Dalmore that we've done. We've seen the influence, but it's just one of the contributing factors because, you know, you've got so many other influences. You've got the water, which is very important, shape of the stills, but then you come to the cask, then you have the different temperatures. But more importantly, people say, oh, you just put it in the warehouse. No. We didn't just put it in the warehouse. We put it at the bottom of the warehouse. We put it in the bottom of the stove. We put it 3 high. We put this in pallets. We put that in, you know, 312 high. But the ones that we want to nurture are maybe the ones at the bottom of the stove and the deepest part of the warehouse, nearest the walls, where the temperature will be constant, be very cold in the summer, even in the summer temperatures, but even cold in the winter. So the terroir, the barley is important, but never forget there are so many other factors. And I really mean that. The cask at the bottom of a store, as opposed to the ones at the top, the variations will be there as well. So many contributions have to be taken into consideration.
Let me amplify that for a second, and let me get Mr. Tongue and Mr. Lips to work together properly. So what would happen, Richard, if you took a cask from Dalmore down to Jura and a cask from Jura to Dalmore to the warehouses there? What would that be?
Right. Well, we've done that quite often. You know, Jura has been matured on Jura. Jura has been matured up at Invergordon. What we found over the years, and this is where it comes into, you've got to really see it in a proper experiment. First of all, you must have all the same cask to do it. And then watch the maturation, watch the temperature. What we did generally find is that the maturation perhaps on the mainland was speeded up, whereas the ones on the island was a little bit slower. But then you got a bit of more weight from the ones on the island and less. But that is hyper critical. There were subtle differences, but nothing that the consumer would have noticed. But, you know, you've got to be realistic and you've got to be aware that sometimes it's not, you know, getting whiskey off an island, particularly Jura, down at this period here, and in the winter months, the ferries go off and everything else. That's why you must have stocks, you know, scattered both in the mainland and on the island itself. Otherwise, you're not going to fulfill your customers' needs. And that is essential at the end of the day.
Bill, what did you do? What would Glenmorangie taste like down on Isla and Ardbeg up at Glenmorangie?
Yep, good question. I mean, if I just pick up on something Richard was saying at the end there, the common practice within the Scotch whisky industry with a lot of distillers is that even although from the perspective of your brand, it would be perfect to have every single barrel matured on site at the distillery, that's just not necessarily realistic because A, you might not have enough space on site at the distillery to have enough warehouses, but more importantly, you're spreading the risk a little bit. So it's not just about getting supply for bottling. It's just if anything happened, if anything went wrong on any one site, if you're spreading your stock out a bit, then you're minimizing the risk. To answer your question about Glenmorangie at Ardbeg and Ardbeg at Glenmorangie, the differences that we've found, and I completely echo what Richard's saying here, the differences were so subtle that I don't think too many people would actually have picked them up. Because, you know, guess what? The climate is reasonably similar throughout the whole of Scotland. It's a small country. Now, obviously, if I store a barrel of Ardbeg in cool, damp warehouse number 3 at Glenmorangie, and then compare that to the very same barrel stored in a high rack in one of the warehouses at Ardbeg, guess what? I probably will pick up a little bit of difference. But, you know, the other thing I would say here is unless you're bottling single casks or doing very, very limited bottlings, you know, typically Richard and I will be making selections where we're bottling hundreds of casks together at a time. So you're smoothing out a lot of these differences. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why we do it. So again,
Yeah, the fire risk, that Bill was talking about.
Yeah.
You cannot have your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Even in bourbon, you've heard of the fires, the horrendous fires that went on. You need to spread that out, otherwise you can be in real trouble.
Yeah.
Realistically, it's just not possible. But again, I keep coming back to the same situation. Bill and I would never release anything unless we have our mark to say that has reached.
Absolutely.
Perspective.
Great question here from Steve Bishore, our buddy at Mount Vernon, Virginia. What can you both say about the way Scotch would have tasted in the 1500s or 1600s compared to the late 19th century and today? What differences would we have seen? Obviously, it would have been smoother today, more consistent, but what would the differences have been?
Maybe I should hand over to Richard here, because you were around in these days, Richard.
Yeah,
no?
That's right. Yeah, I was around when Queen Elizabeth I was born on the 7th of September 1533 at Greenwich. But during her reign, she was meant to have taken a lot of spirits, but the spirits in the 16th, 17th, 18th century were on many occasions very, very inconsistent, because there wasn't any kind of experiment that was done, especially by the monks, because we always talk about the dissolution of the monasteries between 1536 and 1541, when some in the region of 23,000, 823 monasteries were destroyed, and these poor monks had to go. And where did they go? They brought the secrets with them, and they brought them into Scotland. They brought the art of distillation with them, but more importantly, the distillation process was different. The shape of the still. What are we going to fill into? Well, we've got a bucket. What do you mean a bucket? Well, we haven't got a cask. And then we come along. What's in it? Well, there's been fish, meat, salt, gunpowder, but we've got to fill it. So this inconsistency went on for many, many years, until eventually they decided the cask has to be this, has to come from America, has to be sherry cask, you name it. So during these periods, especially in the 18th century and 19th century, did have great whiskies, but there were very few. They were very inconsistent. And to be a master blender, what's his prime objective? To create a character, but he must maintain the consistency. That consistency is here today, and we're fulfilling the consumer's needs. But back then, not always.
And the one thing I would add to that is that these days in the malting plants, we have what's known as indirect firing. So the malted barley is dried using heat from steam radiators or something else, and a fan drives that heat through the malting barley. But back in these days, going back to when Steve was asking the question, there was no such thing. That technology did not exist. So the barley was dried over fires made of peat, probably coal, wood, all sorts of things. So guess what? The malted barley in these days, most of the whiskies would have a much more oily, smoky character than they do have today. And what we offer today is an altogether more subtle and more elegant style of whiskey. But good question, Steve, and nice to hear from you, sir.
Even Bill, when we're talking about, coming over the war years. Now, I know some of your viewers are not that old, but let's go into the pubs in the beginning of the 50s, 1950s. What was on the bar? Soda siphons. So, and you asked for a whiskey, and then you would douse it with the soda siphon that was in most Scottish bars. Why? Because these whiskies that came out were hard. Now, I'm telling you, a lot of people in Scotland during these years would finish up with a whiskey and they would just knock it back. But they were harsh whiskies, but the soda managed to subdue it. Nowadays, you don't need it because the whiskies are excellent.
Okay, we got a great question here, a comment from Dan Woolley, our buddy in Australia, who has been a longtime brand ambassador, who just launched the Highwayman brand of whiskeys himself. He wants us to ask you, Richard, about the time you threw a bucket of ice at bartenders in, I guess, New Orleans at Tales of the Cocktail, not New Ireland here. But it's early in the morning in Australia, so we'll give Dan the benefit of the doubt on that one. So what happened when you threw a bucket of ice at bartenders in New Orleans, Richard?
To be quite frank and honest, I've thrown one or two buckets. I did throw one in Australia, but I won't tell you the reason for that. But the one in New Orleans, I'm not sure. I think it was to make the point, as I always do, that a lot of people, particularly in America, when you go and you ask for a Scotch and ask for a bourbon, and automatically the bartender will absolutely throw cubes of ice in it. And I've always said, you don't need it, particularly when you have, styles of the King Alexander, the Dalmore 25, 35, 40. You don't need ice. What it does is it masks the flavor. So, on occasions, I would say, if somebody's in a bar and he goes clonk, 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 what do? You take the ice bucket and you chuck it. But sometimes the ice bucket, sometimes the ice goes where it's not meant to be. So I'm hoping the one in New Orleans didn't go where I thought it might have gone.
Let's do a quick since you both have spent so many hours and so many, probably the course of a year, I don't even want to know how much time you two have spent traveling over the years, because I travel a lot, but you guys travel far more than I do. Let's do a little quick quiz here. Favorite airport?
Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam.
That's a most curious question. Probably Hong Kong, because I'm a shopaholic and there's fabulous shopping at Hong Kong.
So best duty free would be Hong Kong?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
But, I have to say, Mark, every airport is different. And, as much as we love them, the time that we get back to that airport, we just want to get home, because, traveling has its good points and its bad points. And there's some but, the lovely points more than anything to me, traveling, is actually to meet people and look at their eyes. And you say, what are you talking about? Because if you look at somebody's eyes, the body language, everything will tell you whether you've made that person happy. And that's a big reward that both Bill and I get, that you've made somebody's day, or you've made them. I never drank whiskey before, and you've now converted me. That's a great pleasure.
It's the biggest reward we have, Richard.
Yeah.
The feeling that we've made someone happy. Absolutely.
Okay.
And let's quickly say, when we mean happy, we don't mean drunk. We mean,
of course,
delighted, joyous.
Yeah, with the facts that we've maybe created. I thought, whiskey was whiskey. No, whiskey's not whiskey. There's a lot of work that goes into making it.
Best hotel in the world?
Ooh. Difficult one.
Yeah. My favorite hotel of the ones I travel to regularly would be the Mandarin Oriental in Nihonbashi in Tokyo. And I like many aspects to it, and I always get a room with an absolutely fabulous view. And each room has a bathtub big enough to fit 10 people in. Now, I hasten to add, there only is ever one person in it, sadly. That's me. But, that's probably my favorite hotel.
Richard?
Difficult. Intercontinental are some of my favorite ones. But, each one, I have to say, I like big rooms. Hotel Kuro in Japan, in Tokyo, is another one which has been updated. But, every hotel, and, we've spent some ones that you open the door and you hit the bed, you open the door of the bathroom, you hit the toilet, up and down. It's not all glamorous, I can tell you that right now, but hotels are, some are good and some are very good, some are excellent, but there's a few shady ones as well.
Okay, favorite airline?
Well, I think Bill and I both, we both use British Airways a lot.
We're very patriotic.
Yeah. And, we'd like to see new planes coming in quite often, but, we still like to fly the flag. But, there's a lot of, KLM and Emirates, we have to use them as well. But, they've all got their good days and their bad days. Yeah. But sometimes the staff really make it
Yeah.
Very special.
Yeah, I have to agree with Richard. It's British Airways for me. I always get very well looked after. And as I say, we're Scottish, but we're British, so we like to fly the flag.
Worst airline.
Now, we need to be careful here, Mark, because we don't want to spoil a beautiful evening by getting sued by someone here.
We're not going to get sued. Go for it.
You got to remember, a lot of airlines have their good days and their bad days, as I've said. So, in the main, when you really stack it all up and see what's going on, generally, we don't get a bad service. Very rare is it a bad service,
Oh, come on. Please tell me you've actually enjoyed flying Ryanair.
No, we're not going to lie and tell you that, Mark. Okay.
Okay. Favorite airport. Well, we talk about favorite airport. Worst airport. Which airport do you least enjoy flying through?
Yeah, I think the worst experiences I've had back in the day have been in Vietnam, in Hanoi Noi Ba Airport, where I have literally had to fight and elbow my way into the counter to actually get checked in. And, that was quite a stressful experience. I believe that airport has been completely rebuilt, but I've never been invited back to Vietnam, so I don't know. But that was probably my worst one that I've been to.
I think it's a very difficult question, but, in the early years, we went, because we were owned by spirits, from Dr. I had to go to many airports in India. Some of the ones I landed in India didn't quite make the runway. But I have to say, in the early years, in the 90s, it was some crazy times. Trying to get to the airport was a real struggle. And you didn't know, even checking in, the flight was meant to have taken off. But things are under better control now, but during these early years, it was very hair-raising traveling in India, no matter which airport it was.
Great question from Jeff Jackson. Is there a whiskey outside of your own brands that you have discovered and really enjoy and wish you could duplicate?
Again, it's a difficult question to answer because there are so many other whiskies that I respect for many, many different reasons. So difficult to actually name names. And, if I'm talking about Scotch whisky, I could easily name a dozen other brands that have aspects I'd like to recreate. But at the end of the day, it's a curious question because our own brands exist because they have their own unique character. So I don't think Richard or I would really be looking to change that too much. So I know I'm giving a little bit of a politician's answer here, but I don't think I can choose anyone in particular.
Yeah, because you're right, Bill, because you must remain loyal. What you've got from Dalmore, Jura, Federica, and Tamil, that's the character. And much as you like to have a, La Santa, what have you, Glenmorangie or, an Ardbeg or what have you, or a Balvenie or a Glenfiddich, you look at them. And Bill and I judge these whiskies every year, and we pick nuances perhaps we've not seen before. But, it doesn't make us envious. It makes us aware of what's going on and something that we could perhaps use or look at. But most of us have gone down some of these paths. But the respect we have for the rest of the company, Diageo, Pernod Ricard, Glenmorangie, William Grant, etc. They all have great attributes that we feed off each other and talk to each other. That's the main thing.
Well, guys, we have gone for almost 2 full hours here, and we'll probably go for another couple of hours. I want to thank you both for doing this on behalf of all of our viewers around the world who are watching tonight. And guys, this has been just an absolute blast. And thank you again so much for doing this. Stand by for just a second here while I wrap things up here. Thank you for everybody to everyone who's watching us around the world right now. We appreciate all of your time. We appreciate you taking a couple of hours or so to spend with us on Wednesdays and again on Fridays. Don't forget to join us for the Happy Hour webcast on Friday, 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. London time. And don't forget to talk about, we've got a few hours left, and I can't let this go without mentioning the Buzz Cut for Bartenders campaign, because we are still trying to raise money for the United States Bartenders Guild Foundation's Bartender Emergency Assistance Program. Got word today they've given out more than $2 million in grants, and they've received close to 300,000 requests for assistance from bartenders and bar staff who have been put out of work around the world. Now, we're probably going to wind up extending this by 24 hours or so. We were going to cap this off later tonight, but we have not quite reached our goal yet. So we are going to go ahead and keep this thing going for another 24 hours or so. If you donate anything, and I know times are tight, but if you can donate anything at all to the USBG Foundation or to the Drinks Trust or the Ben in the UK or any of the other charities that are working with bartenders and bar staffs around the world, here's what I want you to do. Use the hashtag #BuzzForBartenders with the number 4. Send us a copy of the receipt and either send it to comments@email.com, or you can post it on social media. And here's where you can get all the details at whiskycast.com/buzzcut. Now, the buzzcut part comes from the fact that we are trying to raise at least $1,500 for the USBG Foundation or any other charity that's working with bartenders and bar staffs around the world. You will notice, as we talked about this at the beginning of the webcast, my hair is getting a little bit shaggy here too. If you look at it, it's longer than it's been in a long time. Frankly, there's a lot of product in it that keeps it looking as reasonably decent as it does now. You ought to see me in the morning, gang. I'm not about to post that picture. But here's the thing. We run a raise $1,500, and I'm going to go ahead and extend this to midnight tomorrow night, New York time. We're going to give you 24 more hours, because here's the deal. We have an Old English sheepdog named Bristow, and by Old English, not just the breed, but yeah, he's old. He's about 12 years old, and he's been with us for a long time, and we love sheepdogs, but damn, they have thick fur. And we've broken a couple of sets of dog hair clippers over the years trying to get through the dog fur. But we have a good set now, and the boss has said that if we can raise $1,500 by originally midnight tonight, we're going to extend it to midnight tomorrow night, that she will put the guard on and leave about an inch or so and a half of hair and give me the COVID cut, as they refer to it. God knows I need it, but here's the deal. We raised $2,500. She's going to leave the guard off and give me a military spec buzz cut like you will not believe. And my hair has never been that short. So here's the fun thing. If we do it, if we raise that money, it'll be on the webcast live Friday night when we have our weekly panel of whiskey writers and bloggers joining us. She's going to give me a buzz cut live here on the web Friday night. If we reach that goal, minimum $1,500 just to get it cut short, $2,500 to go all the way. Once again, you can get more details at whiskeycast.com. Just look for the /buzzcut on whiskeycast.com or the hashtag #BuzzForBartenders. And Lord knows I need a haircut. And if we're going to go that way, we're going to raise some money for charity and help some folks out who really need the help right now. Thank you again for joining us. Don't forget to join us Friday at 5 o'clock for the Happy Hour webcast. And thanks again to our guests, Richard Paterson, Dr. Bill Lumsden, two of the best in the industry. I hope you learned a lot from the webcast tonight. I hope you laughed a little bit too. And thanks again to all the first responders, the healthcare workers, and everybody who's helping take care of us. We'll see you Friday. Sláinte, gang.
Slange it.
Slange it.